Hi folks, we're Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the extent to which Western governments, I'm sure at globalist direction, are being told to, and the ideological fanatics they stick in the public services are being told to promote women's sports. Now, we're not talking about the women's sports where women, do quite well. Say, I don't know, major tennis championships as an example. The crowd that watch the women's matches is maybe not the same as the men's, but it's they get a decent crowd. Or women's figure skating or something like that. They do quite well at that. So it is possible to draw crowds to women's sports, and that's fine. Now, what happened recently, in fact, there are two instances. One is a media sports announcer said that watching a women's, I think it was a women's soccer game, that they were playing like a bunch of schoolgirls. I'm paraphrasing. I don't think that's the exact phrase, but he said something words to that effect. And he very quickly found himself out of a job. I mean, what? Wait, hey, stop. He said they were playing like schoolgirls, and that means he gets fired. I mean, what? Now, there was a mass pile-on where the guy's accused he's a misogynist, he's a fucking Nazi, he's Hitler personally, he's a fascist. I mean, wait a minute, stop, everyone, take a chill pill. All the guy said was they're playing like schoolgirls. So hardly a big deal. Now, there's another guy who some months earlier who had opposed this media outlet was going to increase by 20% or something their coverage of women's sport. These are women's sport that nobody watches. They can't even get a crowd of 100 people to watch the match live, but the government's forcing them on. There's two things. One is the government hands out a lot of money to these media outlets. Maybe it's government advertising. Maybe it's just handouts given through NGOs. NGOs supply all their key staff for free. And that's paid for indirectly via the tax. There are whole various ways of reward. The top executives are given luxurious overseas trips. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But they're increasing their coverage of women's sports by 20%. And again, these are sports that nobody's watching. They cannot stand alone organically. They can't survive on their own. They have to have artificial boosting. The other side, particularly with the private media outlets, is the government threatens them with not being able to renew their broadcast license, for example, or that the process that they have to go through. There'll be a very, very detailed audit this time, which will cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to get through. But if you want to promote women's sports, we'll let you off the hook. So there's various methods of coercion, threats and direct subsidy that are being used. And these, again, to artificially boost women's sports. Now, I mean, do I personally care? Well, not really, but the point is that nobody would watch these sports, and no one, as in the public, no one goes to watch them or wants to have anything to do with them, or their sports just cannot get the coverage. Men's sports, on the other hand, in that same category, whether it be soccer or football or something, they do get huge crowds, and that people willingly want to go and watch that, whereas they don't want to go and watch the other. Well, why don't they want to go and watch it? If it was any good, they would go and watch it. But instead of looking at it that way, the globalist controlled flunky stooges and hangers-on and parasites say, well, no, the reason they don't go and watch that sport is because all these men are misogynist, fascist, fucking Nazis, maybe even Hitler personally. That's why they're not watching it. So we have to fight back. We have to fight the patriarchy and the misogyny and force these people to watch it even when they don't want. That's the attitude they apply to it. But this is a guy who says that women's soccer is pretty ordinary, and he gets fired for it. He loses his job for that, for goodness sake. That's how insane the times we're living in. Now, recently I went with my wife was going shopping, and she said, "Look, I'm going to be a while, looking at this scoping and everything." So I wandered around, and across the road from the shopping centre is like a sports or a complex, if you like, of sports fields and so on. So and I could see there's a crowd over there. So well, I'll kill some time and I'll wander over there. I didn't know what was there. I mean, it was going to be a sporting fixture of some sort, and there was quite a big crowd watching a schoolboys soccer match, and there was a women's soccer match. Like, these women looked like they were, in their 20s, I suppose, or even 30, some of them. So I looked over at that. That was in the adjoining field. But there's nobody looking at that match, or hardly anybody. They were all looking at the schoolboys match, and the schoolboys were, I don't know, 14, 15 years old, something like that. And so much to my surprise, just chatting and walking around chatting to folks, the women's team was actually the regional team. Like, this was the best that the region, the city, had to offer. And I was watching them playing. I mean, shit, I could do better than that. I'm double their age. I'm in my early 60s. I could beat them. It was, very ordinary showing. They were lacking the athleticism, the speed, and so on. Now, I've noticed when they show the soccer matches, or clips of them at least, in the media, they speed up the film by 20%, which gives the impression that they're all moving at the speed of light and all this sort of thing, and that's bullshit. There's a heavy overrepresentation of lesbians as soon as you move up the food chain there in the women's game, at least. So they're there because they hate men and because they think by playing soccer they're fighting the patriarchy or some bullshit. But just watching, the reason nobody's watching that women's match is because there's nothing to watch. It was a bunch of half-assed amateurs running around, playing house or playing sandpit. They weren't serious players in any street. The schoolboys were way better than that. Now, the Australian women's national team got beaten by a schoolboys team. Now, this is the Australian national women's team, the very best that Australia has to offer in terms of women's soccer. And they were playing a local schoolboy side, not the national schoolboy side, not the state schoolboy side, just the regional side of schoolboys. And the schoolboys beat them 7-1. 7-1. Now, it's hard to imagine such a one-sided result. Remember, it's the women's national. This is the Australian national women's soccer team getting thrashed by a bunch of 14-year-old schoolboys. Now, in another match in I think it was in the United States, the American United States national women's soccer team. I mean, wall-to-wall lesbians, and they played. I think it was in maybe somewhere in Texas, and they played again a schoolboys team, not the national schoolboys team, not the the East Coast schoolboys team, but just a local side in Texas of schoolboys, and the schoolboys beat them 5-2. And we're not talking that. So just try and gin it up as they got the shortest, most diminutive women's player in the team, and then put her in a photograph with the tallest, stockiest boy in the team, and goes, well, look, I mean, they may be 14, but they're all fucking giants. Look at them, man. Nah, not buying it. Sorry, you just weren't good enough. A local side of schoolboys beat you 5-2. Now, the same goes in England or wherever they do it, Germany and all over the way. Wherever they do this, the women get thrashed by schoolboys. Or I think it was one in England or Europe somewhere where they played a team of over 50s men. So the men are like double the age of the women in the team, and the men beat them 6-1. So the standard of women's soccer is very low. Schoolboys can thrash them. So and so it's not a high standard of sport. These women are just not at they're not anywhere near the elite level. But if someone calls them, look, they're a bunch of schoolgirls, that's because they are. But no criticism can be tolerated, or no even observable facts can be tolerated. If you even say that they play like a bunch of schoolgirls, which is true, That's it. You're out of a job, buddy. You'll never work in this town again. That's how insane the delusional fantasies that surround this sort of thing is. But the idea is, if you force people to do it, and if you lie to them for long enough, they'll consider women's sport at the same standard in the same category, and will take the same interest as they do in men's sport, or that equivalent sport in men, in this case soccer, for example. Now, they've tried to do this over a number of sports, and I've commented on some of this before. I got there was a grand final or a final match of some sort for I think it was women's netball. Now, years ago, I dated a chick doing netball. She had great legs, and so I might wander along to a match or two just to look at all the girls' legs, really. But not because the sport was exciting. I was only really there because she was there. But she the turnout to a final that wasn't huge. I mean, it was, I don't know, a few thousand, I suppose, in an arena that could fit 10,000 spectators. So there wasn't much of a turnout, really. But when it was announced the takings of the gate, how much money they made, it was like $20 or something for a ticket. It was nowhere near the amount of money they took was nowhere in any way representative of the amount of people that had turned up. So I made some casual inquiries, and just to make sure there's any sort of a crowd that turns up, because they got a bit of media coverage, to make sure there's any crowd that turns up, they give free tickets away to all the family and all give it to all your relatives, give it to all your friends, make sure that as many people as possible come along. But they were pretty much all there for free, with free tickets. So the only way they could get people to turn up was, again, the friends, relatives, and so on of the players, and other interested party, and maybe players that hadn't made the cut could come along for free, and their relatives. So they managed to rustle up a crowd of 3,000 or so. But if even 500 people were there paying, I'd be surprised. So even in a sport where there is a decent following, and it's played, it's quite, netball is something in Australia, at least, that's quite widely played all over the country. So there'd be tens of thousands of players in the various grades, but all their associations, everything is funded by handouts. None of it is natural, and none of it is organic. Even in a sport that, again, is widely played by many women, young women, schoolgirls, around Australia. So you'd think that would have a decent shot at pulling the crowds, but even that doesn't make it. Now, I also noticed in martial arts and things like that, was a very heavy push to try and get women, get crowds to come along for women. So there was a tournament where half the tournament was dedicated to women's martial arts, and again, other than the relatives and the friends and the coaches and that sort of thing, hardly anybody turned up. And this was the national championships, and I reckon the crowd would have been 200 people, if that. So clearly, there's just not the following. There's just not the interest in it. Now, the men's tournament, national tournament, whilst not getting a huge showing, still got a much bigger turnout than that. So it goes to show that women's sport doesn't have the attract. People don't want to watch it. Again, there are things like tennis or figure skating. Sure, people go watch that. But equally, even with women's tennis, I find I go and watch it more because the chicks are hot than because of the game. There's not much of an exciting game, unlike the men's tennis. So, and just to sort of support this, the guy who I think was rated 500, the man is rated 500 in the world, played the number one and number two seeds in women's tennis and thrashed them both, even stopped for a break where he had a cigarette and came back in the court and thrashed them again. This is the standard of women's sport. So people aren't going to go and watch it. So the idea of artificially forcing people to watch it, or artificially ginning up and saying, well, the only reason people don't watch it is because of misogyny or patriarchy, that just, I think, illustrates the level of delusion and fantasy that's infected the entire Western world, and it has to stop. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.